So, Josie, a pleasure to be speaking. This book hits me on so many levels. And your other work, your extensive interview with Rivers Cuomo of Weezer, the forthcoming book on Beck, so many great interests that you've got that speak to me. But how long did it take to write Ringmaster?
Ringmaster went from about February of 2020 was when the idea was conceived in a conversation with my spouse, the writer and editor S.I. Rosenbaum, and then it's coming out now, almost exactly 3 years later. So it took about 2.5 to write it, and then there were about 6 months of it getting produced and turned into a physical object, but that was about it.
And you had the blessing of, in the middle of writing it, the subject of your book, all the allegations coming out and all that.
I know, the timing couldn't have been weirder, yeah.
Yeah, so did that change the end product at all?
It certainly changed the end product a little bit because I had to include some of the latest developments, which of course are now a little out of date because of the 6 months that I just mentioned between finishing the book and the book actually becoming a printed object.
Right.
But let me put it this way. Those are minor details when it comes to the larger themes of what I'm trying to play with in Ringmaster. So no one who reads Ringmaster is going to then hear about anything that's happened that's not written about in Ringmaster that has come out since I finished writing, and be shocked. They're not going to go, wow, this doesn't fit at all with what this book told me about Vince McMahon. Although I wish I could be omniscient and just write everything that's going to happen. I can't predict the future, but I think everyone will find that the allegations and other pieces of information that have come up are pretty easy to square with the portrait that I've painted.
How much did you know about Vince before writing the book compared to, what's in the final product? In other words,
a lot.
Did you know all of it?
Yeah, I only knew Vince as a character, really, because I had been watching wrestling when I was a teenager. I was a very obsessive watcher of the World Wrestling Federation, of Vince's World Wrestling Federation, when I was about 13 to 16 or so, which doesn't sound like that many years, but as anyone who's been 13 to 16 can tell you, they're very formative ones. Yeah, every day is a century, and everything you do is the new legend when you're that age. So, I was very into wrestling when Vince was at the height of his powers, and he really burned an impression into my mind. But I didn't know that much about him behind the scenes. As I found out, a lot of people didn't know much about him, even the people who thought they knew a lot about him, because he hadn't really been properly reported at length. And it's a huge amount that I learned. I had to do a huge information download, and then of what was already out there, and then actually start digging and find out what of that was actually true and find out the stories that hadn't been told. And I'm pretty proud of how it came out, but there's a lot that I did not know when I started out.
So I congratulate you because you managed to put out a compelling book where the person that you wrote about was never going to participate in it for a second. That
wasn't really on the table, I don't think. I gave the WWF, sorry, I call it that because most of this book is sort of set during the WWF period, but it's called WWE now. I called WWE, the day before the book was going to get announced, way back in 2020, because I wanted to give them a courtesy heads up just in case they might be willing to participate. I was never going to let it be an authorized biography, but I would have loved to have spoken with Vince or with other people involved at WWE. And they, to their credit, the publicist wrote back and thanked me for giving the heads up, but said not to get my hopes up. And that turned out to be the best advice WWE could have given me, was don't get your hopes up about talking to us, because it just didn't happen. They were completely silent. Even after some initial articles came out, the book's not out until March 28th, but I have written a bunch of things that have been published before then that are in that vein or spinning out of the book, some of which have been pretty sensational, much discussed and controversial. But Vince and WWE just stay silent. Nothing comes out. They say nothing. They act like this book doesn't exist, which I don't know. It's certainly one strategy to approach something like this.
Well, I have two things to say to that. The first is that was going to be my follow-up question of, was there any blowback? Did you hear anything? The second thing, not to make it too much about me, but I'm writing a book right now about Van Halen's singer, David Lee Roth. And the fact that you got a "don't keep your hopes up" is more than I got. Roth's camp just didn't say anything. There was nothing. There was never not even a no. So the fact that you got something is a lot.
Yikes. Yeah, that's basically what I get now. That what we're basically in the same boat. Don't worry. WWE pretty much pretends this book doesn't exist.
Right.
I know they know about it. I know for a fact through sources I have that Vince knows about the book, and but they just don't act like it exists. And honestly, I don't blame them. I feel like if I were in that position, that might be one of the strategies I would explore, is just don't acknowledge it. Because the thing that's interesting about Vince is, it's really hard for anyone, not that I'm saying I'm trying to damage anyone, but it's hard for Vince to take damage. He doesn't damage easily. He brushes it off. And it used to be that he would brush it off by, punching back. He would try and make his enemies into characters or even storylines that he would make fun of on his show. He doesn't do that really much anymore. Now the strategy tends to more be, let's just not acknowledge the things that might make us look bad, as evidenced by this past summer during the period when the new allegations were popping up about hush money, and then my allegations about not my allegations, but the allegations I reported on about rape in 1986, a rape that may have committed in 1986. Once I started doing all that reporting, I get why you wouldn't want to talk about it, because as soon as you talk about it and acknowledge it, people start paying attention to it. And I think people will pay attention to it, but I get why they might want to steer the conversation away by just talking about completely other things and not even acknowledging the book.
Right. As I mentioned at the top of our chat here, you have a book that's coming out related to Beck in the near future. Any overlap between Beck fans and wrestling fans?
Well, there's definitely overlap because, Beck was, I joke that I should call this trilogy of books, my first one being a biography of Stan Lee, the second one being this, and the third one being the biography of Beck, the 1999 trilogy, because they all sort of reached their climax in 1999 when I was 14 and paying very close attention to all three of those things. When I was 14, I was reading Marvel obsessively, watching WWF, and listening to Beck. And it's been really interesting to sort of find that I come up with lots of book ideas, but it just keeps coming back to the stuff that I was interested in when I was 14. That publishers actually want to publish. So I'm crossover, and I'm not alone. There were plenty of weirdo kids in 1999 who loved wrestling and loved Beck. These were two very popular entities as of the turn of the millennium. And I haven't found a ton of Beck himself, I don't think, is a wrestling fan. I haven't seen anything about that, but I think there's a lot of overlap of people who were misfit millennials and really gravitated to that music as well as the art form of wrestling. So I haven't seen any direct parallels, but there will be a lot of thematic overlap, I'm sure.
your Rivers Cuomo interview, which is almost
it was so funny that you brought that up. I did that in college, but I was talking about it recently, so I'm glad you've dug it up.
Well, it is long, it's comprehensive, it's one of the most outspoken things he ever gave the world, because you got him to talk about when songs were written, who inspired things, how people thought about things, his social habits at Harvard and all that. A little bit of overlap is the El Scorcho lyric about watching.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Of course. Yes. Well, with Rivers Cuomo, definitely. Beck, I don't know, but Rivers Cuomo does have the famous lyric in his song El Scorcho. So I went to your room and read your diary, watching grunge leg drop New Jack through a pressed table, and then my heart stopped. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was very funny. When I interviewed him, he was like, "Oh, that wasn't me. I wasn't watching ECW. I literally read somebody's diary, and they had written about watching ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. Sorry for people who don't know, which was a promotion that Grunge and New Jack, these two wrestlers, were in at the time. You can watch the clip of the leg drop; it's amazing. But like Rivers was not like a wrestling head. He just was sort of had a huge crush on somebody who was. But yeah, wrestling is everywhere. You can't escape wrestling in America. It connects to everything in one way, tangentially or another.
Well, I'm finding that almost every single major band ever had one wrestling fan in it. Billy Corgan,
Yes.
he bought the NWA.
Oh, well, Billy Corgan's about as big a fan of wrestling as there is. Yeah.
There's him. You go to System of a Down. Darren is a huge wrestling fan. So almost every single one of these bands has the one. I haven't gauged if Chad Smith from the Chili Peppers is a huge wrestling fan or just a close friend of Chris Jericho.
Ah, yes, that is a common question. Is he a friend of Jericho, if you know what I mean? But yes, that's great. I think you're not wrong. I think wrestling is, let me put it this way, wrestling is not mainstream in the way that legitimate sports or blockbuster movies are, but it's always there, and you'll always be able to find people who are obsessed with wrestling. Even people who go, wrestling sucks now, it's terrible, it hasn't been good in 20 years, but I still watch it, like it becomes an addiction. But it's also just a beautiful art form that, even when it's bad, can inspire really interesting thoughts and discussions, because it's designed to push your buttons. I'm not surprised that rock musicians would like it, not just because it's something that lots of people like, but because rock music, like pro wrestling, is all about pushing people's buttons, not necessarily in a bad way, but it's supposed to be assertive, and it goes right past your defenses of irony or sarcasm or disdain. And because it's so direct and sometimes brutal, it just goes right to your lizard brain and gets you engaged. And then once you have the lizard brain engaged, if you're a really good artist, whether it's a wrestling artist or a music artist, you then engage the rest of the brain. But you always, with rock and wrestling, have to be cool, fun, exciting. You can't be just a cerebral wrestling match or a cerebral rock song and hope to become part of the canon. That's not how it works. You need to be able to be visceral and exciting. And that's what's great about wrestling and rock. That's what makes them populist art forms, is that they're based on really getting at common human emotions that we all feel, as opposed to just meditating on cerebral themes that may be alienating to some.
Well, you said the magic words rock and wrestling. And
the rock and wrestling connection, you might even say. Yes.
People look at the ascent of Vince McMahon basically being Hulkamania, but I think it's the rock and roll and wrestling tying, the rock and wrestling connection, which people always give credit to Cyndi Lauper, but the reality is it was Lou Albano recognizing
Cyndi Lauper. And David Wolf, Cyndi Lauper's boyfriend/manager, who was also deeply involved in that whole transaction. I can talk about that if you want, if that's what you're asking.
I'm just saying, without Lou Albano, would Vince McMahon be a billionaire?
I don't think so. I think there are all of these weird factors in the mainly the mid 80s, all these truly bizarre coincidences that greatly benefited Vince. One was that where Cyndi Lauper, before she was huge, happened to be on a plane with Captain Lou Albano, this wrestler who worked for the WWF, and they exchanged phone numbers. And then later, when Cyndi and her boyfriend/manager, David Wolf, were trying to put together a music video for Girls Just Want to Have Fun, they were like, we should have somebody in it. That'd be funny. Let's get Lou Albano. Cyndi goes, I know Captain Lou. I have his phone number. And they called him up, and he agreed to do it. And this is all just a long, circuitous road that leads us to the first WrestleMania. And in between, there's all of this partnership with MTV, which is so crucial to wrestling, to wrestling going mainstream and for Vince to reach his level of success. You need that MTV endorsement of, oh, this is cool. This isn't just a weird little niche thing for kids or for weirdos. This is something that's ironic and slick and hip and weird and campy. So having that MTV connection, which was not because Vince, called up MTV and said, cold called MTV and said, let's work together. Without that, it wouldn't have happened. The reason it happened was a chance encounter on a plane. It's that kind of stuff that really drives history. Or, Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live, the day before the first WrestleMania, somebody else was supposed to host Saturday Night Live, but there was an emergency at the last minute, and he had to cancel. And because Vince had been in contact with NBC about other stuff, they were like, well, do you want to have Hulk Hogan and Mr. T host SNL? And that's the night before WrestleMania 1.
Right.
And it was when SNL was being watched by literally like 33 million people every week. Like, it was an insane number of people who watched Saturday Night Live. And you tune in the day before, and here's this last minute full episode hosted by Hulk and Mr. T. And like, that was another huge factor. I could keep going. It was all of this stuff that just randomly sort of worked out in Vince's favor in the mid 80s. And without any one of those elements, you would not have gotten all those elements coming together to create that real flourishing in the mid 80s.
Totally. Well, recapping what I've learned before I ask my last question.
Yes.
More to come from you, because there is an unofficial trilogy. The Vince book was conceived and written before all the scandal stuff happened.
Yeah, all this stuff, yeah.
So it is a well-researched, well-intentioned biography encyclopedia of sorts. So congratulations on all that, Josie. And the last question for you is there a wrestler today that you actually do like or admire most?
Oh, geez. I'm not going to cite anybody because I don't want to play favorites, but I do. Oh, geez. I'm trying to think what's a good little way to slide out of that answer, but still give you an interesting piece of information.
You could just say MJF and
oh, God. Well, I don't want to, then I'll just be looked at as being a Jewish favoritist and, only looking out for my own people. He did just have his bar mitzvah, though. So
yes,
I guess I will wish him a hearty mazel tov.
You'll give him a savings bond too.
But no, it's not so much. I actually am not all that up on like the past 6 months or so of wrestling. I sort of finished writing the book and was like, well, I'm not going to write anything else, and I need to finish work on the next book. So I've kind of been living in music land for the past few months because I've been prepping for the next book. But
right.
I like a lot of the wrestlers that are out there right now. I think there's this real tendency sometimes to either say, well, wrestling is back, it's never been better, or wrestling is terrible, it's never been worse. And it's always somewhere in the middle. Right. It's never actually the bold new direction that all the marks are saying, and it's never actually the end of wrestling, as all of the doomers might say. There's always some kind of future for wrestling. I guess I'll end it on this. I sort of end the book this way too, but I'm much more optimistic about the future of wrestling than I am about the future of civilization. Like, I think wrestling is going to outlast this iteration of civilization, no problem. You do not, if you've seen backyard wrestling, my favorite wrestler is just some random backyard wrestler whose name I don't know and who I haven't met, because it's such a beautifully populist art form that you can do if you're willing to risk your body kind of anywhere and under any circumstances. If you can get like one person to watch two people jump up and down on a mattress while a fourth person, slaps the 1, 2, 3 for the victory at the end, you've got a wrestling match. You don't need electricity. You don't need the internet. You don't need phones. You just need wrestling. Wrestling's beautiful. Wrestling will survive the apocalypse. I guess that's my conclusion there.
Beautiful answer right there. Well, I am looking forward to that next book, and I appreciate your time, Josie. Really looking forward to everything to follow. And the best way to find you is the gram.
Yeah, go to my website. Website's probably the best. AbrahamRiesman.com, and that's RIESMAN. But if you mix up the I and the E. I own that URL too, and it redirects to the proper one. Or you can go to ringmasterthebook.com. Ringmasterthebook.com. That has what you need to know about Ringmaster.
Paltrocast.